Hey Jexiteers, thanks for stopping by to this live stream. If you're new to the channel, my name is Riley and I used to be a Jehovah's Witness. And this evening it is my great pleasure to be joined by another former Jehovah's Witness, Ali Millar, who recently wrote a book called The Last Days, and it's a memoir of her experiences being raised as a Jehovah's Witness. So Ali, thank you for joining me and welcome to the channel.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Honestly, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much. So how have you been? How's things been for you since the launch of the book?
Busy, very, very busy. I was really lucky in that lots of papers picked it up. So I've been in the Sunday Times, had a big 6-page spread in their magazine with an interview, an extract from the book. I've been reviewed in the Telegraph, the Observer, the Scotsman, and I've been all over the place. I was up to Edinburgh last week signing books. I've done a tour in London. I had my launch this week as well. I've been on the radio, TV, basically just been everywhere. So I'm good, quite tired, but looking forward to talking to you tonight.
Oh, great. I follow you on social media and I try to keep up with all of your activities surrounding the book. And it has been hard for me to keep up just watching, let alone what it must be like for you actually living it.
Yeah, I made a list of all the press and everything, pulled it all together the other day, and it made me tired just making the list and actually thinking, wow, it's only been, so it launched on the 14th, and it's just been intense ever since. I've not really stopped at all. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, I hope you have some downtime planned sometime soon. You definitely deserve it.
Hopefully soon. I'm off to Edinburgh to the book festival up there in August, 21st of August. I've got an event there, so I'm really looking forward to that. And then I've got a few London events in October and November as well. So I've got bits all over the place. But yeah, I'm sure I'll be able to stop in between times.
Excellent. Okay, so perhaps we could start by you just summarizing the book for us.
Yeah, so the book, sorry, my cats are chasing each other like quite violently, so I don't know what's got into them. I think it was thundering earlier, and I think the thunder has just made them go absolutely bonkers. So the book is called The Last Days, a memoir of faith, desire, and freedom. And it takes the reader inside my life as a Jehovah's Witness from the age of 2 up until I leave when I am nearly 30. And then it has a little bit of the kind of aftermath of leaving as well. So it's told first person present tense, because that was my way of making sure that the reader was right alongside me as well. So that instead of, often in memoir, there's these kind of reflexive passages where you're thinking about your life. I didn't want to do that. I just wanted the reader to be right there experiencing my life. And you know what it's like as a Jehovah's Witness. You spend your whole time telling people what to believe and what to think. You preach to them. And I didn't want to preach to the reader in any way. So I wanted just to show the reader what was happening, and then the reader could draw their own conclusions as well. So that they could, I think that that's the most effective way really of showing what's happening. Just present the facts, and then the reader can think, well, that's a bit strange, or that's a bit coercive, or that's controlling. But I didn't want to say that's what was happening. I just wanted to show them life inside the organization.
And I must say that I found the book absolutely riveting. And I think that's in no small part due to the way that it was written, the perspective that it was written from, as you mentioned, first person, present tense. You really felt like you were being carried along on your journey. And that made for a really, really engaging read.
That's brilliant. Yeah, sorry. Are you going?
No, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's probably the thing that my editor and I worked the most to make sure that that's what was happening in the book. When I first wrote the first few drafts, it was really difficult to write. It was really traumatic. And I'd kind of created this distance between myself as the narrator and the reader as well. So that when it came to rewriting, and I rewrote the book a lot of times. We worked a lot on it. So when it came to rewriting, that was the first thing that we thought was we need to make sure that the reader is really alongside, and also that it was a page turner as well, that it was pacey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I must say mission accomplished. Absolutely, mission accomplished. So
Brilliant.
can I ask what motivated you to speak about your experiences in this particular way? Because there are millions, probably, I don't think that's an overestimation, of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and not everyone writes a book. What in your case motivated you to do that?
Well, when I first left, I didn't want to talk about it at all. I just wanted to leave, and I thought that leaving meant just walking out the door. And then for quite a long time afterwards, I had a lot of kind of post-traumatic stress symptoms. And I realized that the nightmares, the feeling sick, the flashbacks, all these kind of things weren't going to go away on their own, and that I had to start undoing the beliefs. And one way that I started undoing the whole belief system was by looking at websites that the witnesses would call apostate websites. And they were massively helpful because they showed me that I hadn't been part of a religion, which I'd thought up until then, that I'd actually been part of a very controlling organization that had manipulated me. And when I realized that, I started to think, hang on a minute, I know something that loads of other people don't know, that people outside didn't know. At the same time, I'd done a course in creative writing, so I'd done an MA in creative writing, and I knew that that was one thing I could do. And I was trying to write other things, but obviously as a witness, you're raised that you have to tell the truth as well. Mm-hmm. If you know the truth about a thing and you don't tell it, then that's a sin. And then, so there were all these thoughts in my head, but I really didn't want to write about my experiences. I started to think maybe I could plot a kind of nonfiction book about the organization. And again, I thought, well, that's probably not going to get picked up or commissioned because I'm not a journalist. And at that stage, I didn't have any kind of authority. And I thought also when I'm being interviewed about it, people would say, why are you interested in this organization? And if it wasn't something I could talk about, then I wouldn't be able to say, well, that's because I was one. But also the really most motivating factor was that I had a friend who had left the witnesses, who was called Chris, and he died by suicide. His mother had shunned him. And it was at that stage that I realized that shunning kills people, that it's a massively serious issue. And the last time I saw Chris, we'd sat and we joked about writing a book together. We'd had a fight about how we would approach the book. We had different ideas about what we do. So he'd actually kind of put it in my head. And again, I still didn't want to do it. I don't remember the point at which I sat down and said, right, this is what I'm doing. I just did it, and I wrote the first draft very quickly, sort of thinking no one will want to read it and I won't send it away. I almost just thought, right, I'll just get it out, I'll do it. And then I contacted Matthew, who became my agent. And when I sent a query off to him asking if he'd be interested in reading it, I felt sick for days and days because I was like, oh my goodness, what have I done? You know, it's the forbidden thing. You're not supposed to speak out. So that was like the really, really terrifying thing. But I think leading up to writing the book, it was this kind of combination of lots and lots of different factors that led to me to actually start writing it and start taking it seriously as well.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that there were times where you were actually writing it and you didn't want to. Can you just go into a bit more detail about what exactly your reservations were about putting your experiences into the public domain in such a way?
Well, a couple of things. I think that memoir itself can be quite difficult to make it something that other people, that's going to be interesting to other people. You know, your life is fascinating to you, but not necessarily to anybody else. So that was a big reservation I had. And one way that I overcame that was when it came to actually plotting what was going to be in the book, was thinking of things that were universal to lots of people. So for instance, there's me in the book not having a blood transfusion. So I knew that that had happened to lots of witnesses. There's a judicial committee. I tried to kind of use parts of my life that were ways of talking about the organization. I think my reservation was that it is the forbidden thing. You're told that, you can leave, but if you go away and speak out against the organization, you automatically become what they call an apostate. Even if you don't want to become one yourself, that's just what they make you be. And I still had real reservations about being labeled that. But again, those reservations really changed how I approached writing it as well, because they obviously say like being an angry apostate. So I didn't want to come across like I was angry, which changed the tone of the book too. Other reservations were that I really just didn't want to go back into the past. I didn't want to be seen to be dwelling on something that had been traumatic. I wanted to feel like I built a new life for myself and that I wasn't going back into that. And it was really stressful having to kind of put myself back in memories that were really difficult. So that was another reservation. And I think that's why I wrote the first draft so quickly. It was about 3 weeks that it took me.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really, really fast. And then I put it away and was like, oh, I'm not going near that again. And then I did, obviously. So, yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel about that label, apostate, now?
Well, I think, do you know what? I think it's like so much to do with the witnesses that they've made that up. That's their label, what they would call you. I don't see it as something that I would adopt, because I do think they use it derogatory. I understand that some people want to claim it and make it be theirs, and I think that can be a really powerful way of overcoming it. I would rather just call myself a writer, because I write other things too.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, personally, I've noticed that the ExJW community has a very love-hate relationship with that term. There are some, as you say, want to reclaim it. And then there are others that see it as a slur. So for that reason, they reject it. So I can imagine that for somebody who's either newly out of the organization or dipping their toe into what would label them or brand them as being an apostate, there must be a lot of conflict when it comes to that term and how that term might be applied to them. And I can see it, you probably went through something like that yourself.
Yeah, I did. I think I was more scared. Yeah, definitely. I think I was also kind of scared. There's obviously like the categories as well, that once you become an apostate, then that's you're basically sort of damned forever. I thought it was a real derogatory term, and it's used in a derogatory sense. That's how they use it. And I think it can often be used to discredit people as well. It can almost be they're an apostate, so they're saying X, Y, Z. Yeah. Which I think that's why that's never something that I would label myself as, because then I think that people finding my work or people coming will then say, that's what you are. But I think it's a horrible term as well when they use it when it's coupled with mentally diseased. And I think that's an absolutely shocking thing to get away with printing. It's a shocking thing to get away with saying from the platform. It's a terrible thing, and people obviously use that to kind of try and discredit you. But again, I think that language is obviously massively powerful, and it can be used as a weapon. And
yeah, absolutely.
And if people want to call themselves an apostate, then that's also their own weapon and can be their own kind of way of surviving something and claiming it back. So it's quite important, I think, that the term is there and is there for people to use as they see fit too.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you experienced, since the launch of the book, have you experienced any kind of negative backlash from believing friends and relatives as a result of you doing what you've done?
Not that I know about. That's not to say that it's not happening. Obviously, there's been quite a lot of magazine articles about not listening to apostates, not reading books, not listening to things that they say. I've had I had quite a few messages, particularly after the Sunday Times article, asking why I was attacking the nice people, why I was being so nasty about witnesses. And I had to make it very clear that I'm not being, I have no beef with individual members. I think that witnesses are being manipulated by the organization. And so my beef, if that's what you want to call it, the problem I have is a manipulative organization who is using its members. And that's where I have a problem, because that's something that's massively unethical, that a charity can do that to people it's claiming to help. I had quite a few of those kind of messages. I made a video for Penguin's website for their YouTube channel. I had some comments under that. I've had some 1-star reviews for the book on Amazon, which have been quite funny, because they've kind of been like, witnesses are really, really lovely people, 1 star, or 1 star and no comment left. I do believe it's probably called theocratic warfare, like they like to say. But I've not had any really explicit backlash. And I have had I've been inundated with lovely messages as well, with people from all over the world who've seen themselves in some way in the book, or who've read the article in the Sunday Times and have had similar experiences and thought it was just them. And that's like completely counteracted anything negative that has come out of this. It's just been absolutely amazing to realize that the need for the book was there. And like I said earlier, I was worried that it was just my personal story, but it's not just my personal story, because of how the organization works. It's so homogenous and the beliefs are so uniform that it becomes a story that represents what's happened to just countless thousands of other people.
Absolutely. I mean, you made a really interesting point about your beef, as you put it, being with the organization rather than individual members. I mean, that's a sentiment that I reiterate constantly on my social media, and just in the content that I put out. But the fact that active witnesses, view that as an attack on them is very, very telling, because to me, that says that they can't divorce the idea of them as an individual from the organization. And I think when your identity is so tied up in a particular belief system, that in itself is a problem. And I think that's one of the reasons why stories like yours and content put out by other ExJW activists is so important, because I think that's something that believing members need to try and realize, that there's no good reason why your identity should be so wrapped up in an organization to the point that when the organization is criticized, you feel personally attacked. That isn't right.
No, that's such an important point. I know that I used to feel like that. I remember quite a long time ago, maybe about 2004, there was a Channel 4 documentary about witnesses, and everyone was warned about it at the convention, because it was about the same time as the convention, and we were warned about it from the platform. And I felt like it was we watched it, me and my ex watched it, and I felt like it was an attack on me. But I think that that's what actually witnesses are told as well, is that any attack on the organization is an attack on them, because it's almost like you're not actually, when you're not actually allowed to see the organization. You're not allowed to see the mechanics of how the thing works, because if you see the mechanics, you can start undoing it very quickly. So it's got to be that it's an attack on you. And I tried to show that as well in the book, the kind of group think. So at the beginning of the book, the prologue is we. So in the Kingdom Hall, we are Jehovah's Witnesses and we believe, and that was a way of presenting all the beliefs, but also doing that mentality of that if it happens to one person, it happens to you all. And it's hugely dangerous when, as an individual, you think an organization represents you as well. That's definitely moving into the realms of cult for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. So my next question might seem a little bit strange, but have you received any kind of negative feedback from other former witnesses?
Again, I've had messages from people who've said that they're definitely not witnesses, but no former witnesses. No, not that I know of. I mean, I've had people sort of comment on things saying, I'm not a witness now, but this doesn't match what happened to me, so I can't give it a good review, which again, I think actually shows the enduring influence of that group mentality, because it's almost, if it didn't happen to them, then it can't have happened to me. It's not being able to see that although lots of parts of my experience were mirrored in some way with other people, not all of it was. It's my life. It's what happened to me. It's never going to match everybody else's. So I've had a few of those comments, but in terms of like people who are more prominent in speaking out, I've only met with support. I've realized that the ex-witness community, you know, on Twitter has been really welcoming and really supportive. And that's been really helpful, particularly, you know, in the lead up to releasing the book, because you're so nervous. It's a terrifying thing to do. But yeah, everyone's just been really, really nice, actually. And of course, there's always going to be outliers and always going to be people saying, well, that's not how it happened, so that's not real. But in general, I have felt really supported so far. I'm always going to go with so far, but yeah.
That's good. The reason I asked that question is that personally, I've observed that a lot of former witnesses don't necessarily leave behind all of the mindsets that they had and all of the thought patterns that they had when they were in the organization. And one in particular that I think is applicable to this situation is this sense of being against any kind of self-promotion. You know, witnesses have a very, very judgmental view. I mean, like in that clip in the recent convention with the sister who was like promoting her business on social media, and she got basically told off by another sister. There's this sense of, oh, you're seeking great things for yourself. You know, and it's not inconceivable that that attitude may still be present in some witnesses or some former witnesses. You know, have you received anything like that?
No, I've not. I mean, I've had a few people saying, oh, well, she didn't do this right, and I'm totally going to go away and write my own book, and I'm going to show what it's actually like. And I'm like, well, go and do that, because you know what? It's one thing to say you're going to write a book. It's a completely different thing, actually, to be able to do it. A book's a really hard beast to do, and it's really hard to get published. It's hard to get picked up by one of the biggest publishers. But yeah, I completely know what you mean. And I think that that's also an attitude. There is the self-promotion one. There's also the idea, I think, that still that women shouldn't speak out and shouldn't say things. And it just, again, it shows how deeply difficult it is to undo all of these things that people have lived with for their whole lives. It's hugely hard to unpick yourself and remake yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. So you've mentioned that you've had therapy. Did the therapy come before, after, or during you writing your book?
Before, quite a long time before. I probably should have some more, actually, because the book brings back a lot. I mean, I feel like the book, it was horrible to write, and I would never describe it as cathartic in any way, because it was very difficult. And I wouldn't advise people to kind of jump headlong into any kind of trauma through writing as a way of hoping to get better, because I don't think that's how it works. But certainly through going back to memories that were very traumatic and reframing them, and sharing them and actually learning to talk about them and not be ashamed of them anymore, because I was really ashamed of a lot of things that had happened. The book certainly made me feel differently about the past, but I've not had recent therapy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the book is extremely open. I mean, it's a warts and all account of your life in the organization, and I can imagine that. I mean, for me, as someone who read it, there were parts of it that were extremely difficult to read. I mean, very, very difficult to read, let alone what it must have been like for you actually writing it. And I can just imagine that putting your experiences on paper would have been an extremely traumatic, event for you. Please excuse my Google speaker thinking that I'm talking to it. Let me just unplug it. I'm so sorry. There you go. Yeah, I can imagine that putting your experiences on paper in such an expository way must have been a huge challenge for your mental health.
It was really difficult. First couple of drafts, I would be sick afterwards. I'd have panic attacks.
Wow.
I've never washed as much. I used to have to shower like after I wrote, just to kind of, I think, just get it away from me. It was really, really difficult to do. It seems so strange now looking back and being quite, I can get up and I can read from the book. I can talk about the book. I don't feel affected at all when I'm talking about it. But those early times were really difficult. I used to use music from the time, so I would listen to songs that I deliberately hadn't let myself listen to, and that would take me right back into scenes, and then I would kind of walk around the scenes, and that was how I got my memories back. But I also had like safe songs, so at the end of the day when I'd finished writing, I would listen to music that kind of brought me back into the world that I was in. But yeah, it was deeply traumatic. I wanted to make sure though that everything was on the page, because I didn't want to kind of present myself. I didn't want to present myself as a victim. I wanted to present myself as a human. And I think sometimes we can, writers can try and make people take sides as well. I didn't want to be like, oh, I'm really great and these bad things happen to me. Like I said earlier, I just wanted to show the things that had happened and let the reader kind of draw their own conclusions. But yeah, there were some bits that were really difficult to write. There were some bits I really enjoyed writing as well, despite the fact it was hard. So there's obviously, I had an eating disorder as a teenager, and that's one of the bits that people have found really hard to read. But for a long time, I'd never seen eating disorders portrayed in a really meaningful way. I'd seen that it had kind of been teenage girls want to be thin and they starve themselves because they're vain. So I completely disagree. That's not what eating disorders are. It's so much more complicated than that. So I wanted to bring that to the page. And so it was really important to me that I nailed that. So from a kind of technical perspective as a writer, I loved doing that because that was a real challenge to bring something. Also to bring something that's quite boring, because nothing happens when you have an eating disorder. You are just at home starving yourself. So to kind of keep up the pace at that bit was really difficult, but I really, really enjoyed writing that section. And I actually think some of the more difficult sections, so my grandpa died the day I was baptized. Well, he died the day after, but the day I was baptized, my grandparents weren't believers. It was just my mum and my sister who were believers. And the day that I got baptized, I was very thin, I was ill. And he was at a family party and my uncle was trying to phone the stadium. He had a big stroke and we would have been able to go and see him. But we couldn't see him because no one passed on the message to us at the stadium. So that was a really upsetting event. It was a really difficult event, but I really enjoyed the challenge of trying to bring that to the page. So at times, although it was really hard to do, when I got kind of like further down the line with subsequent drafts, it was also, it was really interesting from kind of a writing perspective and getting better as a writer as well, some of the more challenging scenes.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, the part in the book about your eating disorder, because as difficult as it was to read, that was actually one of my favorite parts of the book. And I don't mean that in a voyeuristic way. I've never experienced an eating disorder, but at the same time, I've never seen an eating disorder presented in that way before. I've only ever seen it presented as an illness. But I think the way that you spoke about your experience with eating disorders, I could definitely see that you felt an overwhelming lack of control in your own life. And that's something that I can definitely relate to from my experiences as a witness, even though I've never had an eating disorder. Do you get what I'm saying?
Absolutely. You're not the only person who said that. Almost everyone who I've spoken to who's read it has found those sections difficult, but that they've got something from it. And I've had so many people say almost the same sentence you just said. I've never had an eating disorder, but, and then there comes the point of identification. And I think that that's what writing should do, is it should give someone something to kind of identify with, or that they can understand it better. And I think, as a witness, your whole life is mapped out. You don't really even have to make choices. There's reasons for not making choices, because you don't need to be ambitious. The end is coming. You don't, like you said, you don't need to promote yourself. You don't need to have people looking at you. You can literally just live quite a solitary life. You can hide yourself away quite well. Just being part of a group is enough. You don't need to develop yourself as an individual. In fact, you're not supposed to, really, are you? So that overriding lack of control, I wonder if that's something that's quite mutual to teenage witnesses, if that's something that a lot of them feel.
Yeah, I'm sure it is, no doubt. I mean, both as a child, a teenager, and as an adult in the organization, there were times in my life where I definitely felt like I wasn't in control of my own life. And I think ultimately, I mean, speaking personally, if I can, just for a minute, I think ultimately that's what led to my exit from the organization, is not wanting to be confined and squeezed into this mold that everyone from every direction is telling me I needed to fit into. Did you feel that at all?
Yes, ultimately, yeah. I remember, so I was really bad at leaving. I took ages to leave. One reviewer said that actually in the review. Why didn't she just leave? What was she so afraid of? Well, I think they missed the point of the book. But anyway, that feeling of the lack of control definitely contributed. And I remember in the lead up to finally being able to actually do it, I was standing at a crossroads, just such a clunky metaphor, but I was actually standing at a crossroads near my house, and it was winter time. And I remember just thinking, like, I'd been told my whole life that I had a purpose, and I suddenly didn't know what that purpose was, other than to get into paradise. But I didn't know what I was going to do there. I didn't know. It felt like the purpose just ended as soon as Armageddon. And I thought, that's not a purpose. It just suddenly, everything just sort of seemed to crumble. And yeah, I think I'd always fought against that, being part of a group. I never really felt comfortable in the group either. I think it's the kind of organization that, although it wants you to be part of it, if you don't totally fit in, then they do still make you feel like an outlier as well. So for instance, my mum was a single mum. The rest of my family weren't in the truth. So yeah, I was never kind of like seen as, I didn't have a high standing, shall we put it that way. But yeah, I think definitely as soon as you start to realize that you're not actually following who you are, and you're not having an opportunity to discover who you are, it's a really difficult situation to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. I describe it as feeling like a square peg being forced into a round hole. That's basically how I felt my entire time as a Jehovah's Witness.
And it's so damaging. It's just,
Yeah.
it's no way to live as a child, a teen, an adult. It's a terrible existence to not be made to be allowed to discover who you are. But I think, again, that's how they operate, is that my whole personhood and your whole personhood was controlled, deeply controlled. Our personalities were shaped and engineered by the beliefs that we were told were our beliefs. Our reality was shaped. Our everything was controlled.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of my other favorite parts of the book is where you described about putting all of your meeting clothes into a bin liner and then just taking them out to the street and putting them into the bin. And the reason why that resonated with me so much is because I did almost exactly the same thing with all of my meeting clothes. There were only two differences. It wasn't a black bin liner. It was one of those brown paper sacks, the large ones that you put inside the wheelie bin. I put all of my meeting clothes into that. And instead of putting them in the bin, I took them to the charity shop.
Less wasteful. Yeah, if I'd been thinking, I probably would have. I had to put them in a black bag because if I could have seen them, I probably would have wanted some of them back. But I couldn't stand to look at them. I don't think I could even stand to think of someone buying them and having that kind of history attached to them. So when you did it, how long had you been out for? Or was it just like a gut reaction?
When I did it, I'd been out less than a month. Yeah, I'd been out less than a month when I did it, I think. Yeah.
Because I was the same. Yeah. I was at the last meeting, and as I got up, I knew I was never going back. The Kingdom Hall was above a butcher's shop, and it was like a flat. And I walked down those stairs and thought, I am never setting foot inside the Kingdom Hall again. That was it. I knew I'd gone, so I didn't need my clothes. And it was only the Bible that I couldn't do it with, because I thought if I put, I was just terrified if I threw the Bible away that maybe the demons would come or something bad would happen. At that stage, I was still quite superstitious about it, but felt so liberating as well, just to throw away these clothes. And again, clothes are such a powerful way of expression, but the way they're used in the organization is that they repress you. You're not allowed to express yourself very much through your clothes. And certainly when I started to doubt and started to kind of get a bit dodgy, as I think was probably the expression they used, when I started to doubt, like I would wear shorter skirts, I'd wear skirts that were above my knee, and I'd get told like, oh, we can see your knees, sister. I'd be like, okay. I'd wear lower tops, so I definitely was starting to kind of express something through my choices. But yeah, you're definitely really not allowed to express very much through your clothes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I went through a similar thing where it came to my dress sense and how that connected to my identity. Yeah, so I can really, really relate to that. Definitely. If there's one thing that you would like the readers of your book to take away from your entire experience, what would that be?
How tightly controlled I was, I think. How coercive the organization are, and how dangerous they are. How dangerous the beliefs are for children, and how adults are manipulated as well. That would definitely be what I want people to take away. That's why I wrote it. I wanted people who outside who didn't understand who witnesses were. I wanted people who thought that witnesses were a bit funny and came to your door and were something that you can make jokes out of. I wanted them to realize that that's not what the organization are at all. It is absolutely not something that is a laughing matter in any way. And that's what I want people to take away.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's something that I personally find extremely frustrating, is that the public in general don't realize just how dangerous and manipulative this organization is. They just see, individual witnesses are very nice people. I can count probably on less than 10 fingers how many Jehovah's Witnesses I've met that I would say that is a bad person. generally speaking, Jehovah's Witnesses are nice people, but I think that at the same time that's like the organization's superpower. It's the niceness of the individual witnesses. That's what allows them to fly under the radar as a cult and as a high control group. And I find that extremely frustrating. I just want people to know they're not just quirky Christians who turn up at your door on a Saturday morning, that there is a real sinister and dangerous side to this organization.
That's exactly it. And that's what I want people to know. I want to hopefully put people off actually listening to them and put people off giving them the time of day. Like you say, they're not bad people. And I think that's a really good way of framing it, that actually is the superpower. That's how people can be drawn, because they think, well, these are nice people. Yeah. They're good citizens, they have morals, they can seem, nice in the face of a disintegrating society. They also have some absolutely terrible beliefs. Yeah. And I think that also needs to be spoken about as well. That, are you a good person just because you don't do bad things? Well, I'm not sure. I think some of the beliefs are deeply, deeply troubling as well. And so I kind of wanted to show that too, because after I left, I was very ashamed for a long time of the things that I had believed. I thought, I believed that homosexuality was a sin. Like, that's an awful thing to believe. I believed that I should be joyful about the end coming. But if you frame that differently, that's that being joyful that 8 billion people are about to be destroyed, or more than that. So it's really, once you start seeing those beliefs from outside, you have to think, these are good people who are being led to believe really, really uncomfortable things, and that's how terrible things can happen. That's how people can be shunned. That's how people can be manipulated. It's really dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you happy to take some questions about your book from the audience?
Yes, of course.
Excellent, thank you. So if Mrs. Jexit would be so kind, thank you. So this one is from Chris Cortez. How much did you and average Jehovah's Witnesses generally know about Charles Taze Russell and Joseph Franklin Rutherford, the founders? I read about them, and they're very manipulative and disturbing individuals. Yes, they are indeed.
Yes, you're absolutely spot on. But so when you are a witness, you're told a very edited version of these people. You aren't told the whole picture. And that's kind of what happens with all of the organization's history. It's a revisionist organization. They get rid of older literature. It can be very easy to do now that things are digital and things are online. So no, I wasn't told the full story about either of them. They were framed as being really important. I don't know what it's like now, but in the 80s, they were almost worshipped. They were the founders of the religion, and they were the people who brought God's light to earth as well. So they were really looked up to. But we were given a completely edited version of their life.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, when I started waking up, I absolutely devoured so-called, quote unquote, apostate information. And I think in about a 4-week period, I had learned more about the organization in that 4-week period than I had known the whole previous 42 years that I was a member.
Yeah,
there's absolutely no doubt.
And because I can't remember what the book was called, but there's a sort of like authoritative quote book about the history of the organization that you study as a witness, so that's like, well, you go here and you learn everything about the past instead of you go anywhere else. And I did the same thing. It was quite a long time after I'd left, but as soon as I actually started studying seriously about the organization and realized that what I'd been told was completely a manipulation of the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Another question from Brianna Yarborough. Are there other memoirs that inspired you when writing your own? Good question.
No. So I was terrified when I was writing my own that I would start like maybe talking in someone else's voice or picking up on different styles when I was writing it. So I didn't read any other memoirs when I was writing it, and I actually hadn't read very many memoirs before. But after I finished, I read Educated, because what happens when you're pitching a book to an agent is you have to compare it to other books that are similar. So I read Educated after I'd finished my first few drafts, and obviously thought it was a great book. And I also read Pre-Study by Patricia Lockwood, which is about growing up as the daughter of a priest. Her dad decides to become a priest, and it's hilarious and brilliant and disturbing as well. I'd say that they obviously were probably the two memoirs that really meant a lot to me after I finished writing it. So there weren't any that inspired me directly. I was really inspired by The Land of Decoration by Grace McLean, which is a novel, but it's about a little girl growing up in an unnamed sect. But any ex-witnesses who read that will be pretty sure what religion that little girl's in. And that was the first time I'd really seen the witnesses in anything, or a religion that bore a resemblance to the witnesses. And that made me, when I read it, that made me think, yeah, I want to do this too. So that's probably one of the biggest influences pre-writing the book.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Yes.
Okay, Rianne, a very good friend of the channel. Thank you so much for your question. So great to watch this interview, Riley. Ali, you're an incredibly brave woman. Thank you so much. We can all relate and be inspired by your story. Absolutely. I completely agree.
Thank you.
And the higher evolutionary, did you find yourself having to explain a lot of the cult elements to the editors, or had they known about JWs already?
Yes, I did have to explain quite a lot, but also I think the prologue really helped. So the prologue kind of helped them, helped my editor understand sort of the beliefs that I was dealing with. There were little bits where, you know, I didn't want to keep going on throughout the book, like every Saturday I'm going on the ministry, every Saturday I'm doing this, or every Sunday we're at the public talk, whatever. And I remember one stage meeting my editor, and we were talking about how the book was going, and I said something about being in my 20s, and she's like, oh, did you still have to do the ministry? Are you still doing it at this stage, because it's not in the book? And I was like, yep, never stopped. So there were those bits, and at one stage we did nearly make like a glossary of terms, because quite often I'd say something and we'd have to reword it. I wrote about, like, I'd say the heart condition often. And Robin, my editor, would be like, you know, that's just not going to hit it with the general reader. So at times I think I almost used too much witness language, and we did have to take quite a bit of that kind of strange way of speaking, because obviously language is one of them, like the most ways that you're manipulated. It's the way that the witness world is constructed. So I had to ease back on that. But everyone who I worked on the book with was and has been massively sensitive, really sympathetic about it. And I felt that they kind of treated the story with the gravitas and the seriousness that it needed. But I didn't have to explain things too much. Although at times they were really shocked. I knew my editor was quite often kind of like, my goodness, I can't believe what I'm actually reading here.
Thank you. Yeah, I can imagine that must have been a huge challenge. Reading the book as a former witness, I guess I didn't really pay a lot of attention to what the book would have sounded like to someone who'd never been a witness. But thinking back on it now, I don't think it would be too challenging for a non-witness to grasp, you know, the concepts. And I think that you and your editor done a really good job of making sure that it was digestible by the non-witness reader.
Yeah, that was a big challenge. But I think I think it's worked. I've not had anybody say, "Oh, I didn't get this bit," or "I didn't get that bit." I think they did, and it's really hard as well not to kind of repeat yourself when you're really keen for people. So obviously, it's called The Last Days. It's partly about the influence of believing that the end is just right in front of you and how terrifying that is. But I didn't want to keep going on about that, and it can be really hard to mention something enough, but not to do it too much. So there was a lot of, I mean, it started writing it in January 2019, and it came out 2 weeks ago, and I've pretty much been working on it consistently since August 2019. So it's a long time. Yeah,
a huge feat. Thank you. Do you have any more questions? Okay, from Bob. My ED went...
Eating disorder.
Eating disorder. Sorry. My ED went the other way with binge eating and put on weight and not caring because no brother was interested in me. And I was so depressed in the cult. Paradise was going to put me perfect. That's really sad.
That's really, really sad. And I think that's a massive problem in the religion, cult, organization, whatever you want to call it. That are constantly deferring living, Paradise was going to make you perfect. There's always something that's going to be fixed at this future date. And you're never really properly alive, despite being told it's the best life ever. It's a really, really cruel way to live.
It is. It's not a life at all, let alone the best one ever. It's just an existence. Everything is deferred and put on hold until what they perceive to be the real life. Okay, from outside the box. Well done for speaking up. You are a very, very brave and strong woman. Could you tell us specifically as you can, what was the main factor that woke you up?
So I had a judicial committee, and very shortly after that, I was ostracized. I wasn't disfellowshipped. I was reproved. But a few days after that, at the public talk, they had a marking talk. I wasn't warned that they were going to do that. And then a lot of people within the community started to ostracize me. They started to kind of pull away from me. I was clearly seen as a bad associate. And that was it, because I thought, this isn't loving. And that's the one thing that they trade on, is we're the most loving organization. And I thought, this doesn't feel like love. So I'd had that kind of slow drip. And then I went to the meeting one day, and the circuit overseer was there. And he was on the platform, and he looked directly at me because I was late. I came in late. He looked at me as I sat down, and he read a scripture. And then he said that scripture meant that anyone who was divorced, I was divorced by that time, would never gain God's favor. And I knew that was a lie, because I'd never seen that scripture interpreted that way in any of the publications or ever from the platform. And he said that, and I thought, then why am I trying? And that was it. And that was the meeting. I packed my books into my bag. I wanted to leave halfway through, but I wasn't giving them the satisfaction. And I just got up at the song and just left. And that was it. Never went back. So I think it was the lack of love combined with just this complete manipulation of scripture. I thought, well, can't be God's organization then.
I can imagine that must have been really, really tough to go through. I mean, I've had an experience of being counseled by a circuit overseer from the platform as well. I mean, nothing as drastic as what happened to you. And it didn't wake me up, but it wasn't nice. It wasn't horrible. A nice thing to experience. Yeah.
It's bullying, basically. Organizational bullying that's kind of sanctioned. And everybody takes it because they call it discipline as well. But it's just bullying.
It is just bullying. It is. And, you're told to be humble and yielding, and for women as well, submissive. So there's a whole host of reasons why you basically just have to shut up, sit down and take it.
Yeah, suck it up. Because if you don't take it, then you're basically showing worldly attitudes as well. Yeah, so you can't win.
You can't. Okay, that ExJW, which another good friend of the channel, What do you love to do now that you couldn't do before?
Everything. Yeah, so writing. I always wanted to write. And when I was a witness, I was really aware that I would just have to write really crappy stories because I wouldn't be allowed to have anything happen in them. I love listening to music, any kind of music, films, books, tattoos. I really like tattoos. Yeah, basically life. So you don't really get to live it properly before, do you? So yeah,
No,
I like
no, you
doing
don't.
anything.
Yeah. Did you find as a witness as well, you're constantly censoring yourself when people make conversation with you or ask you questions because you don't want to give the impression that you're a bad associate, or so you're never being fully yourself to anyone.
I
Did you find
found,
that as well?
yeah, all the time. I don't think I really
Yeah.
knew. I didn't know who I was when I was still in, for sure. I didn't have a firm idea of what I liked to do, what I liked to listen to, what I wanted to read. And then later, when I started to pull away, I couldn't tell people anything. And that was really strange and uncomfortable. But yeah, constantly self-censoring.
Yeah.
And then conversation was just a bit rubbish as well. You just kind of like, how are you? Oh, I'm good. How are you? How many hours have you done on the ministry this month? Do you have a new study?
That was a good talk. Yes, this morning, wasn't it? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you start wondering how many people are all doing the same thing as well. And I'm sure there's an awful lot of people who are just kind of living this sort of surface existence or a meeting face and then going away and having their own lives. And you can't judge people at all for doing that because it's such a restrictive environment.
Absolutely. I mean, I used to do this, exactly the same thing. I remember one time in particular, I was working on a ministry with a ministerial servant from my congregation. He was recently been accepted to Gilead as well. So he was about to become a missionary, but he was the older brother of a good friend of mine. So when we were on a ministry together, I kind of let my guard down more than I usually would have for the fact that he was my friend's older brother. So he asked me what kind of things I like to read. So I said, I like comics. I said, I particularly like Batman. I'm interested in the psychology of his character. And he didn't invite me to his wedding because of that. He got married shortly afterwards and he invited my mum, but didn't invite me. We lived together in the same house. And I'm almost certain that it's because I told him that I like Batman.
It's just crazy. But that used to happen a lot as well, that people would kind of like lull you, pull you in, and everyone's just trying to do the dirty on everybody else as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Show how holy they are versus how unholy you are. It's like you become the kind of the scapegoat or the low benchmark, so then they're better because they're not as bad as you are.
That's right.
Yeah, that used to happen quite a bit with me latterly as well.
Thank you. Another question from Inky Bink. What other ExJW books would you recommend?
I have to confess that I haven't read any other ExJW books because, again, I wanted to kind of make sure that I wasn't by mistake telling any other stories. There is one coming out, I think it's next year or the year after next. It's written by a Canadian called Daniel. Can't remember his last name right now. My brain is shot to bits because I'm so tired. He is called Daniel, and it's a memoir in essays about being raised as a witness. And I have spoken to him quite a lot, and it sounds, he's in Canada, I can't remember if I said that, it sounds absolutely brilliant. And I think because it's in essays, he'll be able to focus on different bits and tell different parts of the story. And I would very much recommend that. He's a really respected writer. He's already established as a writer, so he's going to be spot on with what he's doing. And I think that I think it's going to be quite an explosive book, actually. I'm really looking forward to it.
That's great. I'll have to look out for that one.
Yeah,
I think we have one more question. From awake.com. I have been writing a book about my experiences for nearly 3 years. I'm struggling with the book structure because I have so many random bits of writing. Any advice?
Structure is the hardest bit. Structure is really, really difficult to nail with any book. It's also like the most important bit. So once you've got the structure, you'll probably find everything else. I would say try and find the story you want to tell. So with The Last Days, I wanted to tell how it felt to be living with the last days, but I also wanted to tell about the last days of me and my mother. So as soon as I had that in my head, that was the story, I had things that I could hang it on. So I would say that as soon as you kind of find that through line through the whole book, you'll be able to start thinking better about structure. Also, as soon as I had, the book is Genesis, Exodus, and Revelation, and they each have their own purpose. So as soon as I knew that was quite easy. I would say go away and just Google, you can find this on Google 3-act structure. And 3-act structure kind of teaches you very simply in a graph the kind of mechanics of storytelling. And if you know the 3-act structure, that can really help what you're doing as well, because you realize that you've got to kind of hit certain points in a plot. That's quite a good one. I would say go away and do that too. And hopefully that helps, because structure is something that like I could quite geekily talk about for hours. And it's the hardest part. So don't be put off. Yeah, don't be put off because you're finding it hard, because you're meant to find it hard. Books are.
Great. That sounds like excellent advice. I'm sure awake.com is very grateful. Okay, well, Ali, thank you so much for joining us. It has been an absolute pleasure. I feel honored and privileged to have had this opportunity to interview you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been absolutely lovely. I feel exactly the same. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, viewers, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that just as much as I did. If you haven't already done so, please click the like button. It will help this video to go out to as many people as possible. There are some really, really good points in Ali's story and her summary of her book that would be helpful to so many people. So please help this video get seen by as many people as possible. And please subscribe to the channel as well with notifications so that you're notified whenever I post new content. Please proceed to the Jexit in an orderly fashion, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching to the very end of the video. If you haven't already done so, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. If you like my work and want to help me continue doing it, please support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Jexit_2020.